Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us tonight. My name is Derek Rogers, and I'm the Stewardship Manager at the Adirondack Land Trust. And I also happen to be an avid birder. And for the past 15 years, I've been involved in several statewide ornithological initiatives. And I'm just so pleased that Birdability has joined us this evening. I first heard about Birdability shortly after I joined the Adirondack Land Trust back in 2021. Our local Audubon chapter, Northern New York Audubon, helped do some initial outreach to land managers seeking outdoor recreation areas that might be included on something called the Birdability Map. And I thought, wow, this sounds super interesting. I mean, if you put the name bird on something, I'm there. So I immediately looked into it and saw this incredible comprehensive map of accessible birding locations throughout the United States and beyond. And you're going to hear more about this map, but it features places throughout the world now that provide quality, accessible outdoor recreation and birding opportunities. So I was super excited to see this map, but then I was a little bummed out because first I noticed there was a huge void space on the Birdability Map in the Adirondacks. And second, because two of the preserves that we currently manage for public visitation, while they're just spectacular sites, don't quite meet the accessibility guidelines or criteria to be featured on the Birdability Map. But we are encouraged that this will soon change. So last summer, we announced the exciting news that we were awarded a $3 million grant through the Northern Border Regional Commission to support accessible wildland trails at two of our preserves, which are near Saranac Lake and Lake Placid. This is the largest grant award we've received in the organization's history, and this is from a program that funds economic and community development projects in northern counties across 4 states in the Northeast. So it really speaks to the importance of our project in addressing the disparity of accessible trails compared to the hundreds, if not thousands, of non-accessible trails in the region. And it just so turns out that these two properties, while spectacular in their entirety, happen to host excellent bird life, including the famed boreal trio, which you can't really find anywhere else in New York State. And the trio includes blackback woodpecker, Canada jay, and even boreal chickadee has been found at one of these sites. And there are nearly 20 different warbler species that also utilize these properties, just creating a spectacular opportunity to experience these sort of, rugged landscape birds in an accessible yet wild location. So in addition to our efforts to create more equitable access to wildlands, we also launched our Birding for All program. This was initially funded through a grant program offered by Northern New York Audubon. And shout out to the Northern New York Audubon folks that are in the crowd out there. I saw some of your names, and thanks so much for joining. But this program outfits local libraries with backpacks filled with high-quality binoculars and field guides so that people can check them out just like books. And I really feel like birds are just the great connector to nature, whether you casually observe birds at your feeders or you just enjoy hearing them while you're out and about, or maybe you've pursued it as your primary hobby. These wild beings just enhance our lives in so many ways. And as a longtime avid birder and someone who has worked in managing public and private lands for nearly 20 years, it just brings me immense satisfaction knowing that two of our future preserves will allow others to experience what I've been fortunate enough to. There's no reason, especially in 2025, that only certain people with certain physical abilities should be the only ones able to experience the joys of nature and birding. Nature is here for all of us, whether you need a mobility device, your body no longer desires rugged mountain terrain, or perhaps you're like me and you have 2 little kids that enjoy going for mellow walks in the woods. And this is one of the many things that excites me about Birdability. It's their efforts and initiatives to break down these barriers and to ensure, as Birdability says, that nature is for everybody and everybody. We have so much to learn from Birdability, and we need them now more than ever. So with that, it is a great honor and pleasure to introduce Virginia Rose, founder of Birdability. Virginia Rose, whose pronouns are she, her, is the founder of Birdability. Virginia fell off a horse at the age of 14, which resulted in a spinal cord injury. A wheelchair user ever since, she began birding 17 years ago and discovered her best self in nature. She leads accessible bird outings for Travis Audubon and at the Rio Grande Valley Birding Festival each year. As a retired high school English teacher, she is passionate about bringing the same joy, empowerment, and community she found in birding and nature to others who have mobility challenges. When you visit the Birdability website, you can read more about Virginia's story through the numerous articles published about her. So, Virginia, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Derek. Can everyone hear me all right? Mainly, I just wanted to say, Eric, you're hired. You're doing everything you say is what I think and what I believe, and I'm hoping to help everyone understand that tonight. So, we're going to start with the idea of what is a disability, what does accessible really mean, and what does it mean to be welcoming and inclusive? Next. So our objectives are, as I just said, understand why accessibility matters, understand what access and inclusion are, who benefits from accessibility, and to inspire decision makers, that's all of you, to identify and remove barriers where possible. And I'd like to just emphasize that I don't want you to think of everyone else as a decision maker. I want you to think of yourself as a decision maker. Next. When we talk about accessible birding, I always want to ask my participants, when you hear the words accessible or accessible birding, what comes to mind? My guess is that many of you are thinking, well, it's birding for people in wheelchairs. It's birding for people who use walkers. It's birding for people who are on crutches or on canes. It's for people who have artificial knees and are just learning how to use them, and a variety of things. But I want us to expand that idea a little bit. And I'll say a lot more about that as we work our way through these slides. Next. This is one of my very favorites. My sister and I were birding in the big thicket. And actually, one of the most poignant moments I had when we were at this beautiful birding site in Texas, and all the walking people, I was the only person in a wheelchair there, which is very often the case. But my sister and all the other walking people had taken off up the hill, and I was in the parking lot and just in the surrounding areas, and I was on a beautiful bridge, and it was, 7 in the morning, and it was migration, so probably April, May, and I was surrounded with bird song. It was so loud, and I was just picking out all the sounds I was hearing, the yellow-throated warblers, and I mean, you name it, everybody was singing up a storm. And I just stopped for a moment. I was so stunned with the beauty of the sounds that I just thought I had this moment of, oh my gosh, I am the happiest I have ever been right now. It just struck me. And I remembered it, and I keep it in my mind, and I mention it often because I want everyone to have that opportunity. And I know many of us have had situations where we were in a beautiful place or hearing beautiful sounds and thinking that same thing. It was almost like an epiphany or a eureka moment. So I wanted us to realize that in these moments, we find our best selves. And that's when my sister and I do the hurrah, the great huzzah, or whatever it is. And a friend of mine caught it on camera. Next. I also want to make sure everybody knows that no one can predict what an individual with an access challenge can or cannot do. I think that it's easy for people who are walking people or sighted people are able to or think they are able to determine what someone can do or can't. But the reality is that we don't even know. I mean, I don't know what I can do until after I've done it. So I want us to make sure our minds are open to all the opportunity and all the potential. Next. So Kat couldn't be with us tonight, but Kat Fribley is Birdability's executive director. She is just an amazing woman, um, a general enthusiast of all things. Her personal challenge, which I love to share far and wide, is to bird in all 50 states by the time she turned 50 years old. And she did that in 2019. What a great goal. We miss you, Kat. All right. So after 17 or so years of birding with all the walking people and never seeing any disabled people on the trails, I thought they must just not know about it. My thought is they just don't know. And so I decided I would go find them and let them know about it, which led to Birdability's mission, which is to share the joys of birding with people who have access challenges, to help make birding locations accessible and birding communities welcoming and inclusive. And I wanted you to see the visual next, because these three things have to happen in tandem. It's important for us to introduce people with disabilities to birding. It's important for us to help make birding sites and natural places accessible. And of course, it's important to introduce people with access challenges to birding. But if we only do one of these things or two of these things, we haven't met our mission. It's one thing to make a birding site accessible, but it's quite another thing to introduce people with access challenges to birding. So all three things have to happen concurrently. So these are the people we work with and for. People with mobility challenges, as I alluded to earlier, people who are blind or have low vision, people with chronic illness, intellectual or developmental disabilities, mental illness, or those who are neurodivergent, deaf, and or hard of hearing, or who have other health concerns. But that's not all. We focus on all life stages. We are looking at parents with strollers, grandparents with toddlers. We're looking at older people done with the bushwhacking, people with new medical diagnoses, folks with new or grumpy joints, because guess who this is? This is all of us. This is our future selves. I like to say that birdability is only for people who age. Next. My friend Kat is usually the person who likes to talk about this slide. She says that disabilities are not the problem. Barriers to people with disability are. Next. So what is accessible and inclusive? I think when we hear accessible, we all have this bit of intimidation. We think, I don't know what that is. How could I possibly know? But what we learn is that nothing is accessible to everyone. So instead, we work on universal design and provide as much info as possible, allowing people to decide for themselves what is accessible to them. And I want to reiterate that. That's such an important point. We'll talk more about it when we get to the birdability map. But for us to think that we are going to be able to become experts on disabilities or experts on accessibility, or somehow able to accommodate everybody at every site is absurd. No one can do that. So be relieved now. Our jobs are to do what we can when we can, and to make sure that people have information so that they can make their own decision about whether or not they can do that particular site. Also, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 and the Architectural Barriers Act of 1968 do not address many of the access needs that folks with disabilities have. Access is the floor, let's say, and inclusion is the goal. Let me give you a really quick personal example. I travel around the country, and I have for years. And when I try to make a hotel reservation and I get to the hotel, the bed is 28 inches off the floor. Well, my wheelchair I'm sitting at 18 inches. There's no way I'm going to be able to bounce 10 inches up into that bed. So when I call ADA about it, they said that ADA does not regulate the furniture in the hotel. What? That's just a great example. Next slide. So why do accessible trails matter? Next, those with disabilities lack the same access to nature, experience, and education. Exposure to nature decreases anxiety, depression, and negative rumination. We've all experienced that. And exposure to nature increases well-being and creative problem solving. There's ample evidence that time in nature provides a range of physical, emotional, and mental benefits and can enhance a sense of belonging. Yet the people who need these benefits the most, the disability community, are often excluded from the outdoors. I'd also like to add that one of the most important characteristics that nature provides, and primarily for students or participants who have autism, is the trait of what they call self-reliance. And as an English teacher, I'm most excited and intrigued by anything that is going to help my students and or all of our participants to experience a true sense of self-reliance. It's never better taught than in nature. I think you'll agree. Next. One of the more in-depth studies of autism and nature connections showed that when autistic children regularly engaged in outdoor activities experienced increased joy and emotional regulation. Time in nature consistently improved a child's emotional state and increased their cognitive ability. My first thought is get them outside. Hurry. Next. Finally, with respect to why accessible trails matter, birding, the practice of observing or enjoying birds in their natural habitats, offers more than just an opportunity to connect with nature. It provides significant mental and cognitive health benefits. Mental health benefits, reducing stress and anxiety. Cognitive benefits, enhancing focus and memory. Social connection and community building. And it is a therapeutic tool for trauma recovery. And I know that every single person in this audience can speak to the ways in which nature has helped them. You can probably think of the moment, the day, the place where you realized you were being healed. Next. So now who benefits from more accessible recreational areas? Your first thoughts might be everybody, and you'd be right. Specifically, when we talk about people who are benefiting, we're talking about kids, we're talking about adults, we're talking about every single one of us as we go through our life stages. Next, what we know. First, we know that 1 in 4 Americans currently has a disability. That's 25%, guys. 36 million have a mobility challenge. 19 million are deaf or hard of hearing. 16 million are blind or have low vision. And 15 to 20% of the world's population identifies as having some form of neurodiversity. And I know we are all conservationists at heart. And when I look at these statistics, my first thought is that's a lot of conservationists, y'all. I always like to start with difficulties. Being in a wheelchair, being outside, and just having the gumption to show up and do whatever I can. First, the lack of information is a problem. Since I've been birding for so long and since I've been in a wheelchair for 52 years, I definitely just operated on showing up and seeing what I could do. There never was the information I was looking for. So I just got it through lived experience. We can do better than that now. Parking is always an issue. Remember, if I can't park, I can't go. So we have to begin with accessible parking. Next, gates. You'd be amazed at how many gates become the obstacle. All kinds of gates. The gates that keep bicycles and motorcycles from coming in also keep wheelchairs from coming in. All kinds of gates that I can shimmy under, but maybe no one else can. Also things like cattle guards, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Railings. Today I was at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. I'm helping that renowned institution become more accessible. And while I was there, I was showing staff that railings are perfectly obstructive. They're put right at a seated person's view line. So I'm teaching people that railings are going to be an obstacle for people unless we can address those early. Next, bathrooms. Of course, bathrooms that are, I should say bathrooms that are available are hard to find generally, but bathrooms that are accessible are even fewer and farther between. Steps and curbs, they're everywhere. I know whenever I ask somebody, well, are there any steps at the site? They generally do this. They start with their fingers like this and they'll go, well, there's just a little step, at which point I'm laughing and smiling because that little step can be the barrier that keeps someone in a motorized chair from being able to access that site. Next, mud and sand and ruts and roots and rocks and gravel. I've seen it all. I should also at this point talk about cactus and talk about cow patties and talk about cattle guards because I live in Texas. So these are the three Texas obstacles that I've encountered. And then often there's a lack of sit spots. And by sit spots, we mean benches. I myself had no idea how important benches were until I started this business. Next. So here's a perfect picture of how difficult it is for me to see. I'm in my wheelchair. I'm on a beautifully accessible bridge. There's a lot of things right here, but this is going to be difficult for me to see through. Next, access considerations. This was my first document. I wrote it 6 years ago, and in it, I had 9 categories. They were only the things that I thought walking people needed to know about. And remember, I could only speak to my lived experience. I couldn't speak to all the other disabilities. So this list has grown leaps and bounds in the last 6 years. I think there's 30 something categories in it now. So when we're talking about, can you go back? Thanks. When we're talking about parking, I use a van. You saw it in that first slide. And that means I need a van space. A van space is the parking space itself is 7 feet wide. And then the access aisle has to be 8 feet wide to accommodate my ramp and my 2 feet landing spot. So that all that information is provided on our website so that people can start to get a better idea about what it means to be able to park. Trail information ahead of time. I've alluded to this. This by and far is the easiest way to be accessible. With your website, providing this kind of information ahead of time allows people with disabilities to make their own decisions, like I said earlier. So this was a really great sign that I saw at Mammoth Cave. Notice that it talks about the length of the trail. It talks about the surface of the trail. It talks about the trail width. It talks about the grade. And it talks about whether or not there's a cross slope, which can be a real monster if you're only wheeling with one hand to stay on the trail. All right, next is bathroom access. I have referred to this earlier. Many of the bathrooms are great for walking people, but not so great for people who are on wheels. Mainly it has to do with thresholds in and out of the building. Mainly it has to do with the weight of the door. It also has to do with the space in the stall. All of that information is provided on our website, thank goodness. Talk about interpretive signs. The first thing I want you to notice in this slide is that the sign is on the slab. That means a person in a wheelchair can wheel directly up to the sign. So many places I go, the interpretive signs are 5 foot, 6 foot, 10 feet off the slab, which means I have to go to cross country to get to it. The second thing I want you to notice is the height of this sign. It's easily viewed and experienced by a seated person, and guess who else? Kids. Also notice in the right-hand corner of the sign is a tactile element. This one is to let a person who is blind or has low vision feel what a sycamore tree might feel like. I think for me, a good way to remember what it is we're trying to achieve here is similar to what Derek said earlier, which is if a person who is walking and sighted and can hear is able to access the information, then anyone should be able to. And just that means making whatever information is available to everybody. Notice also on the right-hand side is, I call it a sound box. I know there's another more technical name for it, but it is a way for a person who is blind or has low vision to be able to get that information another way. So another good example of that. Okay, next. Steps and other obstacles. I love this slide because I have spent many an hour trying to extricate myself out of a bramble of roots just like this. And if I'm alone, I have to wait for a walking person to come by and free me. These roots can make it impossible for anybody who's not super healthy to make their way up or down the path. Also notice that on the right side are one of those gates I was talking about that are erected to try to help keep uh, motorcycles and other such things out of a trail. But remember, that also keeps people in wheelchairs and or people on walkers out of the trail as well. Next. All right, so you have a beautifully accessible ramp. You have a beautiful accessible platform, all of which is made inaccessible by snow and ice. I never would have thought of maintenance as a barrier, but it is. I realize now all the times I was bushwhacking through huge rosemary bushes or big cactus swaths or leaves, particularly in the Rio Grande Valley, that made the going really rough for me. So maintenance has to be on the list. I want you to look at the railings. Let's go back one. I want you to look at the railings in this picture. Notice that this is again at Mammoth. And what they did is they removed two sections of the railing such that a seated person would be able to better view all of the area in a way that a walking person would be able to see it. The plexiglass also allows kids to get better views as well. I want you to also notice the bench. Notice the bench is on the slab. This is another great example of many times benches are placed 5, 6, 10 feet off the path or off the cement slab. And so it's really difficult for people who have access challenges to get to the bench. Okay, next slide. So at McGee Marsh, one of my very favorite beautiful places, a very accessible place, is now is a good time to talk about the joys of birding. And I know most of you are going to recognize all of these. First, for me, is lifelong learning. Birding brought that to me in spades. And you know, it's one of what they say is one of life's keys to happiness is having a lifelong learning situation available to you. Next. the friendships that we have all made through birding, just unbelievable friends, people who are there with you doing all of your favorite things together. The community is unbelievable. Next, the travel birding has afforded me. Oh my goodness. All over the country I have been birding. Physical health. You know, I can't do all this birding unless I'm physically healthy. And the sheer act of birding provides physical health for me. McGee Marsh is up where the biggest week in American birding is. It's in Ohio on the banks of the Lake Erie, I think. Now, I don't know if everyone realizes this, but birding provides perfect areas for you to gain confidence. You're gaining confidence by traveling, by going to new places, by getting in and out of new parking lots and in and out of new trails and in and out of new hotels. You're gaining confidence in experiencing new things. You are gaining confidence in learning the birds and meeting new people wherever you go. Not a day goes by where I am not meeting new people. And again, y'all, that's one of the keys to happiness. Next, independence. That all comes with it. Your ability to be in the woods, on the beach, wherever it is you're birding. And primarily, if you can do it alone, then that's a huge plus. I usually talk to people about the importance of being able to bird alone. I think we've all had the experience of birding alone versus birding with friends. It's a very different experience. I think birding alone is really critical. What happens when you're birding alone is you're not deferring to anybody and no one is deferring to you. And so guess who has to show up when you're on the trail? You. You show up. It's a wonderful feeling to have that empowerment. Next, the community to which I referred moments ago. Amazing people in my life from birding. Lifelong purpose. Every morning, there's never a reason to be bored. If you're not out birding and you have an extra 3 hours, let's study crows. Next, empowerment. All of these joys. Remember, they all originated with some difficulty, but in the end, the joys all make me a more empowered person. Access considerations in the Birdability Map. I have to tell you how this all began. When I was at Travis Audubon in 2019, I was giving a workshop, and my big dream, I just dreamed it out loud. I said, you know, I have discovered 30 birding spots in Austin. They, the 30 spots may not be all completely accessible, but portions of them are. So I thought, if there is Virginia in Austin who has led bird walks at 30 different places, surely there are other places in the country where there are people who know where all the accessible places are. So my thought is I want to go to all those places. I'm thinking road trip. I want to be able to get in my van and drive all over the country and go from accessible bird spot to accessible bird spot to accessible bird spot. At the end of that workshop, two people came up to me and said, "We can make this happen." And I was in shock. What? What? And they said, "We can," they were GIS story mappers. "We can take your access considerations list, turn it into a survey, and make it a crowdsourced map." 5 months later, you guys, they sent it to me in draft form. I made some changes, and then 1 month later, it launched. Here we are, 3 years later, there are almost 2,000 sites on the Birdability Map. Now, Derek, I know this is a very exciting thing for you, but I had no idea that this could happen. And now, as you also alluded to, people are realizing the value of having their sites on the Birdability Map. It's a wonderful place to be. You are finding people striving, doing whatever they can to help get their site on the map. Just last week, I was with Houston Audubon. I was scouting their 3 sanctuaries so that they could get their sites on the Birdability Map. High Island is worldwide famous, but they are not on the Birdability Map. So we're seeing some serious changes coming forth now with that Birdability Map in place. Next, the Birdability Map. I just wanted you to see it. These are all of the sites. I don't know if you can, I can't get to the website to enlarge it, but like I said, just in the US, there are about 1,900 sites. Now you can see that there's a bunch of them on the West Coast, a bunch of them on the East Coast. There's some blank space in the middle of the country and plenty of them in Texas and Florida. There are 15 countries also that have at least one birdability site pinned. Next. So the Birdability Map will give you an idea of where the site is, general information, the length of the trail, all of these questions. They're all in it, all objective. And so it's just a matter of you. We have a printable checklist. You can print it, take it with you into the field, and simply, these are not difficult questions. These are objective questions. You do need to take a tape measure with you wherever you go from here on out. I'm trying to get it to be birdability merchandise so that everybody knows that if you're with Virginia, she's always going to have a tape measure on her because I'm measuring everything. So what I wanted us to notice back on that map, though, is something Derek was referring to earlier, which is we need to get some birdability sites in the Adirondacks. So you can see sort of this blank area in here. So we need to work on that. I would love to come up and help you guys do that. So maybe we can make that happen. Next, ways to get involved in birdability. You can contribute site reviews to the Birdability Map. And again, once you get on the Birdability website, you can go to Birdability Map, you can scroll down and look at the printable site review checklist. You can print it, take it with you, go out into the field, complete it, bring it back home and put it on your computer and pin it. Next. Build access improvements in your park and community using the checklist. That checklist will tell you what is there, what isn't there, and what needs to be addressed. Next, share our resources with anyone who might benefit. Sign up for our monthly newsletter, which is very entertaining, I might add, to keep up to date. Follow at Birdability on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And then join Birdability Captains Conservation Corp. This is one of our newest captains groups to work with a community of other parks and conservation professionals, making the natural world accessible. Next. And then outreach to the disability communities in your area. And I know that this is the hardest part. I'm finding it the most difficult, but we have a long list of disability communities in your area who could benefit from introducing these guys to the outdoors and to birding. Next. This is where I begin, because when I was on that bridge in the deep thicket, and I realized that I was the person that I had always wanted to be, it came to me in a realization that I thought, oh, if that happened for me, then it can be that for everybody. What if all of the best we can be's are just all waiting for us outside? Thank you, everybody. Okay.
Thank you so much, Virginia. That was awesome. Really,
Okay.
really amazing. and you are welcome to the Adirondacks anytime. We would love to host you. And folks, we have plenty of time for Q&A. There are some questions in the chat that I will get to. And it sounds like folks are really interested in this presentation. I just wanted to let folks know that this is going to be live on our YouTube channel. We are going to be sending a follow-up email to all of the folks who registered with some additional information, including the link to our YouTube channel and this fantastic talk that Virginia has given us. Virginia, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. This is just such valuable information, and I know that I'm going to be referring to this quite frequently. I'm going to start with the first question we got, Virginia, and it's one that I'd be happy to help tackle too, but it was, are there any technology used to enable that independent, empowered birding? And I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, the first one that comes to mind, and it may come to mind to you as well, Virginia, but birding specific apps, I think about Merlin, which is the Cornell Lab of Ornithology app that was developed. That is a great field guide that you could have on your phone, and it also helps you identify sounds and songs and calls of essentially every bird species. Virginia, did you have any that you might want to add to that?
Yes, and I also want to direct you to our website. We have a page called Adaptive Resources that'll help give some people some ideas about what they may need. I can tell you, I have so much more to tell you guys. I can tell you about a wonderful experience I had, and I would invite you to read a piece I wrote called The Scope, because Derek, you can probably speak to this. Being in a scope line, I call it a scope line. When all the birders line
Yeah.
up and they're all, say you're looking at shorebirds,
Yep.
the camaraderie that's in a scope line is serious and it's wonderful. And for years, I could not be a part of it
Yeah.
because I couldn't, it's too hard for me to manage a scope. And as much as my walking friends would try to help me by lowering the scope, and it all was just too frustrating. So finally, I decided, okay, I've had it. I'm going to go get a scope. So I got a scope, and then I wheeled into this wonderful camera shop in Austin called Precision Camera. I wheeled in there with the scope in my hand, and I said, okay, listen up. Before I leave, this scope needs to be attached to this wheelchair. All the geeks in the Precision Camera shop went nuts. There were 5 people running around the shop, and 15 minutes later, that scope was attached to my wheelchair.
That's incredible.
So honestly, I give that story mainly to tell you anybody can wheel into a store and make that happen. You just don't think you can. So my suggestion is, if you are trying to make something happen with an adaptation, find people who will help you. For instance, I didn't know that they could, but they did. And so that scope story is on our website. The scope parts are on the website, and you can now go to any camera shop anywhere. All the parts are listed for you, and you can go in and see if you can get a scope set up for yourself that'll attach to your wheelchair. So I have to tell you, the first time I joined that scope line, I couldn't see the birds because I was crying. And all of the walking people that I had been with, I looked up at them and I said, guys, I'm in the scope line. And everybody just, we're all just hugging, we were missing the
Yeah,
birds. But
that is beautiful.
that's my point. This is what I mean by access. Like, you can join the camaraderie of a situation. You join the personality of a situation. You join that scope line community, Derek.
Yep.
So
I 100% agree with you. I mean, to me, the scope line, and I hope we get to share a scope line one day, is just as interesting, if not more interesting and fulfilling than the actual birds themselves. I mean, I recently chased the rare taiga bean goose that was down in Saratoga County, and we were in a scope line, and I saw some old friends I haven't seen in a while. And to me, that was the highlight. And I'm so happy that they made that adaptation for you, and now you're able to experience that. That's beautiful, Virginia.
Right. And so I just want people to know that when we're talking about access, part of it's physical, but a huge part of it's psychological, like the scope line. So look under the adaptive resources. We have a lot of really brilliant guys, birdability captains, who are creating adaptations for their motorized chairs as we speak. One of the guys named Paul, I can't remember his last name. He's just an engineer and he's creating things right and left. And so, yeah, check out the website. And let me also invite anybody who already has an adaptation that works for you. Please let me know because I would be happy to add it to our list so that everybody can know.
Thank you. That's very generous of you, Virginia. And what we will do is if there's any questions that we can't get to by the time this wraps up at 8 o'clock, we can offer to answer those for you. And again, when in our follow-up communication with everyone, we will provide those. Here's a really good question, Virginia. Are there any state, regional, or federal agencies or organizations coordinating birding for those with mobility/visual impairments? I know that you lead some walks, but I believe those are maybe for nonprofit sectors, or perhaps you know of any more established programs that this question refers to.
Well, let me answer in two ways. First of all, years ago, the national parks um, assigned a like a director of accessibility so that anybody could call a national park and say, I need to talk to someone about accessibility. And they have a department and they will send you to that, let's call them a czar of access at these national parks. Um, that's how I was able to do some of the traveling that I was able to do in the earlier years. But so much of what Birdability is doing right now is helping national parks know what to do. In fact, right now we have a situation where we have 6 national parks that are engaging with us. We have 12 interns, and these interns are going to these parks and helping the parks become more savvy with respect to access. So it's happening with city and county and state parks. And when I was first creating this website, I and I think there's still a page on the website that talks about um, implementing birdability in your town. And I made a list of people to call. You call up the city, call out the county and say, I'm interested in accessible parks. Where are they? How do I do it? Just to be, I always want people to know that change makers are not magic. Every single one of us is a change maker. It's a phone call, you guys. It's an email. It's stopping someone in the park and talking to them. All of these things happen. Like, great example, tonight I'm at REI. I'm getting a raincoat. This woman who's helping me says, my husband has MD. I saw your name tag. It says birdability on it. Do you know anything about birding for people who have MD? Well, there ensued a half an hour conversation, but this is what I mean by change making. It's that. It's that. I want to inspire everyone to do that and be that.
Yeah, that's so important, Virginia. And someone on the chat pointed out, and which we're aware of, our New York State Department of Environmental Conservation is also really organizing and taking a close look at this, which is great. I do believe that maybe some of the members of their accessibility advisory committee might actually be attending this right now. So if you are, it's great that you're here, and thank you. They do have some of their sites highlighted as well. which is a range of different types of sites from boat launches to some of their state historic areas. And this ties into another question I got. What is my favorite accessible birding area in the Adirondacks? And when I think about it, it has to probably be Crown Point State Historic Site, which has beautiful paved walkways, large parking areas, that or All Sable Point Wildlife Management Area, which is similar. It has, good paved, flat, gentle terrain, and just really great open marshes right along Lake Champlain. So you can see
Oh,
shorebirds, waterfowl, gulls, terns, you name it. So those would be the places that I would recommend if you're looking for those types of sites. Um, in
sounds
terms of my
wonderful.
favorite, birding places that have just great biodiversity and just like a clashing of different species from the water birds to the forest birds. So yeah, and I have a comment here. New York State Parks is working on accessibility. Yep, Crown Point, like I mentioned. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Barbara. Old friend Barbara Glazer that commented there. So thanks, Barbara. It's great to see you. Um, awesome. Uh, Virginia, I had a question. We have about 5 minutes left, but in case folks were wondering, can you describe just universal design and what that is?
Sure. I think universal design is a step up from ADA. Universal design is a way to help people feel like they are truly making accessible changes to whether it's a city park, a county park, a building, for instance, at Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center today, we were talking about universal design as it relates to the outdoor classroom at the center, as it relates to the ideas of the arboretum, as it relates to ways in which you are addressing the needs of people who are either in wheelchairs, have mobility devices, people who are blind or have low vision, people who are deaf, um, you know, any and every health concern in a way to address as many of those as we possibly can so that everybody can enjoy all of it.
Yeah, but yeah, completely agree, Virginia. It's so important. And, again, just want to look back, well, not physically look at it, but thinking back to the map you showed of the Adirondacks and just the void. And again, what I'm hearing and seeing as a resident here is the recognition that we need more of this work. And I think that, we're seeing it now. We're seeing it with the work we're doing. We're seeing it with the work some of our partners are doing. So let's try to double or triple that number in the next decade or so, and hopefully have you come out and scout the trails and enjoy the experience with all of us. Um, so
Also, let me just jump in. Remember that this is a celebration of what we can do. It's important that the spirit be one of joy and cheer and can do, and that it's going to take time, that I'm a big believer in phases. And so whenever anyone hires me to help them figure out what they're going to do, I'm like, okay, phase one, parking. And, then phase two is a trail. Phase three is the bird blind. Phase four, I mean, these things aren't going to happen overnight, but people are really excited about it, Derek. People are ready. I am seeing it. I encounter it wherever I go. People are on board. So now's the momentum.
amazing. I just wanted to follow up with what you're saying, and then our friend Jason Thurston, who is on the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and he camped out for 40, and I don't have the luxury of having your voice right now, Jason, but it was 40 plus nights at John Dillon Park, which is an amazing New York State facility, accessible campground. Jason, like you, is restricted to a wheelchair, but did 41 nights And he's looking at the map and he says, this is just another way to connect people with disabilities to nature. I'll be sharing this map with the committee and everyone I know. So thank you, Jason.
Yay.
Yeah, it's
Thank
great.
you.
I love to connect you both. And, yeah, I think you've made a lot of new friends
Oh, good.
during this presentation, Virginia. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Virginia. You're amazing.
Thank you.
Hope to see
Thank
you in
you.
the Adirondack soon. Okay.
Hope so. Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everybody.